Because Seth does his thing, I am not absolved from doing mine. I would feel deprived if I did not continue with my own work. Anyone can say, of course, that in Seth's book the hidden processes are so separate from my normal consciousness that the final product only seems to come from another personality. I can only state my own feelings and emphasis that Seth's book, and the whole 6,000-page manuscript of Seth material, don't take care of my own creative expression or responsibility. If both came from the same unconscious, it seems that there would be no slack to take up. Despite this, I am aware of the fact that I was necessary to the production of Seth's book. He needed my ability with words, even, I think, my turn of mind. Certainly, my writing training aids in the translation of his material and helps give it form, no matter how unconsciously this is done. Certain personality characteristics are important too, I imagine. The agility with which I can switch the focus of my consciousness, for example. Seth, when he says, "Now, the information in this book is being directed to some extent through the inner senses of the woman who is in trance as I write it. Such endeavor is the result of highly organized inner precision and of training. She could not receive the information from me. It could not be translated nor interpreted while she was focused intensely in the physical environment." Looked at merely as an example of unconscious production, however, Seth's book clearly shows the organization, discrimination, and reasoning are certainly not qualities of the conscious mind alone, and demonstrates the range and activity of which the inner self is capable. I do not believe that I could get the equivalents of Seth's book on my own. The best I could do would be to hit certain high points, perhaps in isolated poems or essays, and they would lack the overall unity, continuity, and organization that Seth has provided automatically. Besides this, I have certain unique experiences during sessions that seem to compensate for my lack of conscious creative involvement. Often, I participate in Seth's great energy and humor, for example, enjoying a sense of emotional richness and encountering Seth's personality on a very strange level. I feel his mood and vitality clearly, that they are not directed at me, but to whomever Seth is addressing at the moment. I feel them as they pass through me. As Rob's notes show, I often have other kinds of experiences also while speaking for Seth. Sometimes, for instance, I see inner visions. They may illustrate what Seth is saying, so that I am receiving information in two ways, or they may be completely separated from the script. I've had several out-of-body experiences also during sessions, when I saw events actually happening some thousands of miles away. This book of Seth's way of demonstrating that human personality is multidimensional, that we exist in many realities at once, that the soul or inner self is not something apart from us, but the very medium in which we exist. His emphasis that truth is not found by going from teacher to teacher, church to church, or discipline to discipline, but by looking within the self. The intimate knowledge of consciousness, the secrets of the universe, are not esoteric truths to be hidden from the people then. Such information is as natural to man as air, and is available to those who honestly seek it by looking to the source within. In my opinion, Seth has written a book that is a classic of its kind. After referring to him cautiously as a personality, I feel bound to add that Seth is an astute philosopher and psychologist, deeply knowledgeable in the ways of human personality, and well aware of the triumph and plight of human consciousness. I'm personally intrigued, of course, that this book was written through me without my conscious mind there at every point, anxiously checking, organizing, and criticizing as it does with my own work. Then, while my creative and intuitional abilities are given a good deal of freedom, the conscious mind is definitely in control. Yet this book was not written by itself in the same way that some poems seem to be. Often a writer will say that a certain book wrote itself, and I know what that means. In this case, however, the book came from a specific source, not just from out there, and it is colored by the author's personality, which is not mine. The whole creative venture may be the initiation of a personality, Seth, who then writes books. Seth may be as much of a creation as his book is. If so, this is an excellent instance of multidimensional art, done at such a rich level of unconsciousness that the artist is unaware of her own work and as much intrigued by it as anyone else. This is an interesting hypothesis. In fact, Seth speaks about multidimensional art in his book. But Seth does more than write books. He is a fully developed personality with a variety of interests: writing, teaching, helping others. His sense of humor is quite individualistic and unlike mine. He is shrewd, in his manner more earthy than ethereal. He knows how to explain complex theories simply, in person-to-person contact. Perhaps more important, he is able to relate these ideas to ordinary living. Seth also appears frequently in the dreams of my students, giving them instructions that work, either involving methods of using their abilities or of achieving certain goals. Almost all of my students have frequent class dreams, also in which Seth addresses them as a group and initiates dream experiments. Sometimes they see him as he appears in the portrait Rob painted of him. On occasion, he speaks through my image, as in normal sessions. I have awakened many times when such dream sessions were taking place, hearing Seth's words still lingering in my mind. It's not unusual that students should dream of Seth, of course, or that they should dream of me, but certainly Seth has achieved independent status in their eyes and has become a vehicle of instruction even in the dream state. In other words, besides producing the continuing Seth material in this book, Seth has entered the minds and consciousnesses of many people. This is a good deal of accomplishment in 7 years for any personality, regardless of its status. For a non-physical personality, it is astonishing indeed. To ascribe all of this activity to a figment of the unconscious seems rather much. In the same amount of time, I've published 2 books, finished another, and begun a 4th. I mention this to show that Seth hasn't been absorbing any of my own creativity. Rob and I don't refer to Seth as a spirit. We dislike the connotations of the term. Actually, what we object to is the conventional idea of a spirit, which is an extension of quite limited ideas of human personality, only projected more or less into an afterlife. You can say that Seth is a dramatization of the unconscious or an independent personality. Personally, I don't see why the statements have to be contradictory. Seth may be a dramatization playing a very real role, explaining his greater reality in the only terms we can understand. This is my opinion at this time. First of all, to me, the term unconscious is a poor one, barely hinting at an actual open psychic system with deep intertwining roots, uniting all kinds of consciousness. A network in which we are all connected. Our individuality rises out of it, but also helps form it. This source contains past, present, and future information, only the ego experiencing time as we know it. I also believe that this open system contains other kinds of consciousness besides our own. Because of my own experiences, particularly with out-of-body states, I'm convinced that consciousness is not dependent upon physical matter. Certainly, physical expression is my main mode of existence right now, but I don't take this to infer that all consciousness must be so oriented. Only the most blind egotism, it seems to me, would dare define reality in its own terms or project its own limitations and experiences upon the rest of existence. I accept Seth's idea of multidimensional personality as described in this book because my experiences and those of my students seem to confirm it. I do think that in our open system of consciousness and unlimited source, there is an independent Seth who operates in quite different terms than we do. In what terms? Quite honestly, I don't know. The closest I've come to explaining my own views was in a short, intuitive statement I wrote for my ESP class as I tried to clear my ideas for myself and my students as well. Rob had told me about the speakers, as Seth calls them in this book, personalities who continually speak to man through the ages, reminding him of inner knowledge so that it is never really forgotten. This evocative idea inspired me to write the small piece which I am including here. It points up the framework in which I think Seth and others like him may exist. We come together in ways that we do not understand. We're composed of elements, chemicals, and atoms, and yet we speak and call ourselves by name. We organize about our inner stuff the outer stuff that coagulates into flesh and blood. Our identities, our personalities spring from sources we do not know. Perhaps what we are has always waited, hidden in the possibilities of creation, dispersed and unknowing, in the rain and wind that sweeps across Europe in the 13th century, in the heaving mountain ranges, in the clouds that rush through the skies of other. As dust particles we may have blown past Greek doorways. We may have been sparked on and off into consciousness and unconsciousness a million times, touched by desire, by yearnings towards creativity and perfection we barely understand. So there may be others now, like Seth, also without images, but knowing, others who have been what we are and more, often who remember what we have forgotten. They may have discovered through some acceleration of consciousness other forms of being or dimensions of reality of which we are also part. So we give them names who are nameless, as basically we are nameless, and we listen, but usually try to squeeze their messages into concepts that we can understand, cloaking them in worn stereotyped images. Yet they are all about us, in the wind and trees, formed and unformed, more alive in many ways than we are, the speakers. Through these voices, these intuitions, these flashes of insight and messages, the universe speaks to us, to each of us personally. You are being addressed, and so am I. Learn to hear your own messages, not to distort what you hear or translate it into old alphabets. In class, and in life generally, I think we are responding to such messages, sometimes acting them out with almost childlike wisdom, forming them into dramas that are original and individualistic, dramas that arouse within us meanings that cannot be put into words. This may be the kind of play in which the gods indulge, from which creations grow, sprawling out in all directions. We may be responding to the gods in ourselves, those inner sparks of knowing that defy our three-dimensional knowledge. Seth may be leading us out of our usual limitations, into another realm that is ours by right, elemental whether we are in flesh or out of it. He may be the voice of our combined selves, saying, "While you are conscious bodies, remember it was like, and it will be like, to be bodiless, to be freewheeling energy without a name, but with a voice that does not need tongue, with a creativity that does not need flesh. We are yourselves, turned inside out." Regardless of my ideas about Seth or the nature of reality, however, this manuscript must stand on its own as a book. It bears the mark of Seth's personality, as any book carries indelibly within it the stamp of its author, no more and no less. The ideas within it deserve a hearing, despite their source, and conversely, because of it. When our sessions first began, I thought of publishing the material as my own, so that it could be accepted for its value, without introducing questions about its source. This did not seem just, however, because the way Seth's material is produced is part of the message and reinforces it. Seth's dictation is given as we received it, in order, with no paragraphs added or deleted. He certainly knows the difference between spoken and written languages. His class sessions are less formal, with a good amount of give and take. This book, though, is much more like our own private sessions in which the body of the material is delivered. The emphasis is more definitely on content, the stress on the written rather than the spoken word. Seth's sentence structure has not been changed either, except in occasional instances. A few times I made 2 sentences out of one long one, for example. Much of the punctuation was indicated by Seth. In such cases, we just inserted the hyphens, semicolons, and parentheses as he suggested, and deleted the directions themselves to avoid distracting the reader. Where Seth asked for quotes, we have used double quotes. Otherwise, where the meaning seems to call for them, the single quotation marks are used. Seth also instructed us to underline certain words. Seth's sentences are often long, particularly for verbal delivery, yet he never gets lost or loses touches with syntax or meaning. Whenever a difficulty seemed to exist in this respect, we checked out the original session and saw that somewhere along the line an error in copying had been made. I noticed this particularly since I have tried dictating letters into a recorder and note lack of success. After the first few sentences, I had great difficulty in remembering what I'd said or how I expressed it. Proofreading involved work on Rob's notes mainly, as he made them more presentable. In some cases, material not a part of the book was included if it seemed relevant, cast sidelights on the method of presentation or gave insights into Seth himself. As Rob's notes also show, Seth began dictating the appendix as soon as the book was finished. Rather amusingly, I didn't realize that Seth had already begun the appendix, and I spent several days wondering just who was supposed to take care of it, and if Seth was, when he would begin. Here's another note of interest along these lines. I write 3 drafts of my own work, and sometimes still wind up dissatisfied. This book was dictated in its final draft. Seth also followed his outline far more faithfully than I've ever followed mine. He also deviated from it in some cases, however, as is every author's right. From here on, Seth speaks for himself. Jane Roberts, Elmira, New York, September 27th, 1971.